Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gesmer Updegrove's discussion with entrepreneurs and founders. And with me today, I have a dynamic group of exciting founders that want to talk about their companies and give some advice and insight to those of you that are either considering becoming founders or are founders and investors now. My name is John Cohan. I'm a corporate attorney here at Gesmer Updegrove. So I'm really excited to have my guests here today. The first question I want to throw out to each one of you, and I'll start with you, Mark, is tell us about your company and why you decided to start it.
Certainly. So currently I'm the general manager of the SBT division for a company called Fintech, which is the leading alcohol and consignment payment company in North America. As of May of last year, I was actually the CEO of Nexus Group, which was the largest third-party consignment software, and we were purchased by Fintech. So I started with Nexus Group back in 2005, although I was not a founder. I came in when there were 4 employees, including the 2 co-founders. At the time, they had 2 customers. When I left Nexus Group, we had over 100 customers. And I started as a consultant. I was a lawyer in a former life, and they brought me in as an attorney. And I saw what the business had to offer. They worked with very large retailers at the time, with Borders Books and Food Lion, which was a large grocery store retailer in the Mid-Atlantic. And I saw the opportunity. And what was really interesting about this business, because I'd owned 2 businesses prior to this, is that it worked as an alternative to the traditional buy-sell relationship where most retailers buy their product from a supplier and they get paid within a certain amount of time. In this instance with scan-based trading, the ownership of the product stayed with the supplier until the moment it's scanned at the register, thereby eliminating one of the largest illiquid assets on a retailer's balance sheet, their inventory.
Sarah, how about you?
So I founded Silverside Detectors back in 2012. My co-founder is a physicist. I co-founded it in 2013. Yeah. My co-founder is a physicist. He had worked on a new detection technology as part of his postdoc at Boston University, a really low-cost, easy way of identifying plutonium or highly enriched uranium. It was a detector for neutrons. And neutrons are the really nasty radiation that come off the Hiroshima and Nagasaki kinds of materials.
Sure, yeah.
My background was in microfinance and in international security. I'd done a lot of work in Afghanistan and South and East Asia. And I was looking for an opportunity to take a very small bite out of a very complex, intractable problem. And how do you make really low cost, easy to manufacture, scalable technology for identifying big nuclear threats? Is a small corner of something we're all terrified of.
Sure, absolutely. And do you work with the Department of Defense as well, or is it?
All of our the vast majority of our funding has come from DARPA, from the Department of Defense, and that's taken us from what's called TRL-4, which is a laboratory prototype, to commercial sales of our sensors. Wow. So our sensors are now deployed at ports and borders across the U.S., screening all cargo traffic and vehicular traffic for nuclear and radiological threats.
Well, I'm a designer and developer myself. I actually started freelancing for clients when I was 16. And went to school for computer science and continued to freelance throughout college to help pay my way through school, and graduated in 2002, right after the dot-com bubble burst and the September 11th attacks happened. So me and a lot of peers had trouble finding work, and so I continued to do odds and ends with client work while I searched for a more permanent job. Found a job at a startup and needed to hire a team, so I went to the people that were my friends at school and hired them as the tech team because they were also all struggling to find a job. Turns out that the things did not go the way we were expecting at that startup. It wasn't able to get funding, so after about 6 months, everything folded there. But I had something that I didn't have before, which was a group of friends that I enjoyed working with. So I went to them and I said, if I can get enough clients for all of us to support us all, would you want to keep on working together? And so there wasn't a grand vision or like, we're going to change the world. It was, let's keep this team together and do what we like to do, which is build software together.
Great, great. So you guys obviously, each of you have faced different challenges. There's been bumps in the road, right? There's been day-to-day issues you've got to deal with. How does that continue to inspire, or what inspires you, or continues to excite you about what you're doing?
So what inspires me is to build things. So as a child, I remember I loved to build things. Whether I was out in the woods building things with my Lego sets or my Lincoln Logs, I loved to build things. And I was never content with just building one or two. So couldn't build one house, I had to build a village. And when I got into business, which I did in my third year in law school, I started selling baseball hats to colleges and universities. And when my father asked me why I was doing that instead of going to law, I said, because it's a lot more fun. But we were able to build something, and within 3 years, we had 100 employees, and we were selling at about 500 to 700 colleges and universities. And I realized what a interesting task it was to try to build something year after year. And we were doubling in sales, and how do you get it from one size to the next? And we had to add people, we had to add machinery, we had to add processes, things I'd never done before. So that was what was inspiring me. And I guess what excites me now is that over the last 30 years, I've had a number of jobs. I've been COO, CFO, general counsel, CEO. So I've touched about every aspect of a business. Whether it's finance, marketing, sales, operations, and I love waking up every day tackling a different issue and not knowing that I'm going to work and I'm going to handle the same thing day after day.
I like to say that I love my job, and some days I like it. Every job has people and hiring and cash flow and all the nitty-gritty that's kind of consistent no matter what your company is doing. So there are two parts that keep me really engaged. One is the big picture. Yeah. So, what's the big problem that we are trying to address a corner of, and whether it's radiation security or we're working on an application of our sensors for irrigation, smart irrigation for water conservation, to have a small corner of a big societally relevant question keeps me excited. Yeah. And then strategy. I like identifying incentives of various parties out there and saying, how do you knit it all together so we can take one step forward? Whether it's a government program manager, what does he need to do or accomplish in order to move forward? Whether it's one of my engineers, what is she interested in doing in order for me to retain her? How do I align incentives to solve the problems in front of me?
Sure.
Reflecting on over almost 22, actually more than that since I started when I was 16, I really love to help people achieve their full potential, their ideas. And so that's a lot of what we do is we either work with existing organizations that are having some problem, or founders, usually non-technical, have been successful in their industry and have an idea for a new product. And we help them bring that product to market or fix that problem that they're having. And I just love to use the skills that I have to help them be able to do that. And so that's what keeps me motivated now, 20 plus years on, to keep doing that, because there's always someone out there that wants you to compromise. And figuring out how not to do that is challenging, and one I really get a lot of enjoyment from.
So it's funny, one of the questions I want to ask you guys is how you kind of deal with setbacks. Some of what you've said is sort of how you deal with setbacks as well, right? You got to keep them moving ahead. Mm-hmm. Sarah, for you, again, you've talked about kind of what motivates you, what excites you, and you've got to be at the helm and ready and showing leadership. How do you deal with those setbacks that hit you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I tend to be an optimist, and so I tend to assume that things are going to happen the way I want them to.
Right.
And so the biggest setbacks we've had as a company are also kind of this realization for me of, I misread that situation, or I misunderstood what the reality was with that customer or with that market dynamic. And so when I'm dealing with a setback, first of all, I have to separate my personal pride from the impact on my company and handle that. I'm often embarrassed if I screw up like that. And so segregating those is really important, but not ignoring the personal aspect is really important. And then having this more agnostic perspective of the company. Okay, what did I misread? What's the dynamic that I didn't know about or that I was blind to?
I wake up every morning and try to look at the glass half full as opposed to half empty. Yeah. Because what I've learned over the years is that when you walk into your office, everybody that works for you is looking at you. They're looking at you for signs. And if you've just had a tough setback of some sort and you don't look confident, they're not going to be confident. So when we first started our company and we had no idea what we were doing, my co-founder and I in the hat business, we actually adopted the mantra as, fake it until you make it. We walked in like we knew what we were doing, even though we had no idea what we were doing. Right. And I found that that's very, very important. And to always look at the magnitude of a setback and say, there's a way around it.
All of you started with, businesses that were probably relatively small, right? They were a few kind of lean and mean, but you had to scale those businesses, right? Chad, tell me, what do you think some of the skills that are involved in trying to scale a business to a size that's greater than day one?
I think grit is really important. Maybe that's not a skill, but being able to show up every day and sort of work through the challenges and not give up. And I think that having something that you really believe in is important to that. One thing that I've said is unique for thoughtbot is that I fundamentally believe that as designers and developers building products, a lot of the skills that we use on that, agile, iterative processes, work really, really well for business. And I think a lot of people overlook that, or a lot of traditional business processes overlook that. And so that's one of the things that I and we have used quite extensively is, so we're doing retrospectives every 2 weeks with every team, not just technical teams, to identify risk concerns, things to improve, come up with action items. And when you work in that feedback cycle where we're going to try this thing for 2 weeks and we're going to have another retrospective and we're going to see whether it worked and we're going to be honest with each other, just like we do on our engineering and design teams, you work continuously. You realize you don't need to solve every big problem completely. You can say, what do we do to make next week better than this week?
Mark, you started with Nexus that got bought, right? So obviously you had to scale in order to get there. What are some of the skills that you have or that you recommend that in order for someone to get to that exit, if you will, for the bigger company that comes in and takes over?
So one of the things I learned probably about 8 or 10 years ago when I joined a business group called Vistage, it's a CEO peer group.
Yep.
And what I learned through that is that I needed to surround myself with really good, smart people. In most instances, smarter than I was in their own sectors of expertise. And what I also learned is that in order for a business to create value beyond its founder, is I had to sort of work myself out of a job. So what I did is I hired somebody who became my top tactician, and I became more of a strategist, and I became the visionary. And I really enjoyed that work because I've been a firefighter for 20 years, putting out fires every morning you walk in. And as soon as I hired a chief firefighter, I learned that I could spend a lot more time on the business as opposed to in the business. And being a strategist as opposed to a tactician is really what helped my company grow. And I spent a lot of time. I've read over 100 business books. I've been to a lot of executive education classes. And I'm a lifelong learner. And what I've learned is that there are certain patterns for businesses to scale and to become valuable. And it's not too hard if you spend the time trying to find it on what to emulate. And that's what I tried to do. And that's what I was ultimately able to do.
And Sarah, your company is rather niche, right? Esoteric. Trying to scale something like that can be challenging. What do you think? What do you think's worked for you?
I would say, what are we trying to make work for us? As you said, we have the world's tiniest market. We own 80% of the global market for large neutron detectors. So talk about a big fish in a small pond. And so since year one of the business, we've been trying to find alternative markets for the technology and to think agnostically. This is a neutron detector. It looks for neutrons. Who else in the world needs to find neutrons? And so we've been pursuing these other markets. The reason you guys have never heard of a neutron detector is because you don't need to know about neutrons.
Right.
So, but working really hard to find alternative markets and which of those could scale beyond what the bread and butter homeland security market is. And that takes, I would say synthesis is the key word for me, just reading everything broadly. And when my co-founder, who's a physicist, says, stumbles upon a technology that uses neutrons to understand how much water there is in soil. I won't bore you with the details, but you can use a neutron detector to derive maps of water in the ground. And then I go out and start making cold calls to talk to agronomists and product managers at irrigation companies and just to say, here's an idea, where is their value?
Do you get pressure to expand beyond neutrons?
We've spent a lot of time figuring out, do you broaden your technology base or do you broaden the market for what you do well? And that really comes down to saying, what can I do better than anybody else?
Right.
And there are a lot of people that are doing integration already or who have proprietary technologies that we're just not going to compete there. So there has to be that, I think, the objectivity of what do I do well and what do I do not quite well enough, and stop there.
I think that's pressure a lot of companies face as they scale, is this pressure to do more, to be in more places, to be doing more things. But that can just water down who you are and what made you grow in the first place if you're not careful.
Exactly. And turns out you can also make money on a high margin, small volume business in addition to a low margin, high volume business. So
Yeah,
scale,
everybody wants to
scale
think
cuts
big,
both
right?
ways.
But you don't necessarily have to always think that
Yeah.
big, right?
Yeah.
And the accretive value here is probably even as important, I would think, right? Knowing what you know now, what would you have liked to have done back, if you take yourself back to when you first started? One or two items that you can think of now that say, gee, had I known, I would have done something different.
People and processes. I think so. Those are the two biggest things. You put the right people in place. You give them the autonomy to run and to be good at what they do, and give them the opportunity to fail, as long as they don't fail fatally. If you just make sure that you have the right processes in place so that it's replicable. So if your person leaves, they can come in, and instead of taking 3 months to train, they can train in a week because you put everything in place. So those are probably the two big points that I look to that I didn't do early on in my career and had no idea that existed. But I believe that that's replicable across any type of business. If you put the right people in place and the right processes, you can and should be successful.
I don't know that there are shortcuts to learning by doing. I think if you had asked me when I started the business, I would have said, yes, the people matter, hire the right person, be slow to hire, quick to fire, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But until you actually have that one person and you go through the process of the cost of that, it doesn't go from head knowledge to kind of actionable heart knowledge. I wish I had a constant reminder of how long things can take. And even the decisions that have to be made quickly, the implications, the repercussions sometimes take a long time. And
Right.
you can't hurry up people sometimes, and you can't hurry up learning.
Chad, how about you? I mean, you've sort of talked about you started at a really early age, which is great. And maybe there are things you could have done different. Maybe there isn't, but
No, the big one was a lesson that we learned early on, because we started from a perspective where there wasn't a grand vision. I was just trying to keep the team together, and we were doing consulting and design and development. So I picked up the phone and called every past client that I had, and they were they wanted to help. But they said, like, you already built our website, like, so will you fix our computers, or like, because we were computer guys, right? Yep. So we said, being faced with, like, I really want to make this work for this team, I said yes to everything, and then we learned that lesson is when you try to be everything to everybody, then you're essentially nothing to nobody. And in our industry of technology consulting, there are so many companies that are your competitors. Right. So if you just get lost in that sea because you're not clear about who you are and what you do and what you believe, you'll just get lost. I remember the day I literally took out a yellow line sheet of paper and I made a list of everything we wanted to do and everything we didn't want to do anymore. And then I started to work like we had nothing to lose. Sure. And we became super clear about who we were, what we believed, what we did. And when we did that, we just started to be so much more successful than we were. And so I wish that I had figured that out earlier in the process. Yeah. I may not have lost 3 co-founders along the way, right. And we probably would have been even more successful quicker.
Obviously, no one can do it alone, right? It takes a village, right? And I think advisors are always helpful for founders and CEOs. Mark, you mentioned that you're in Vistage, so you definitely have some workings going on there with some ability to deal with colleagues and people that are in the same level as you and be able to find out kind of how they're handling different problems. But advisors are always kind of helpful too, I would hope, right? And being one of the advisors here, I want to ask, what's the biggest value that we as Gesmer can bring to the table for you guys?
I think I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record here, but especially on the networking side, we're a consulting company, we're an agency, we work with businesses, and so to have a law firm that helps us meet new people, and directly has led to multiple clients. It's paid for itself, basically. So that has been a tremendous value to us. And I don't know that there's another firm out there that does what Gesmer does in that regard, certainly not in Boston.
Well, when I think about that question, there are two things that come to mind. And then the first one is actually the networking. So I met Steve Snyder 13, 14 years ago, the entrepreneur in residence, and I met him at an event, and we started talking. And I probably spent 3 years going to events with him and being introduced to people and before I needed to utilize an attorney. As an attorney myself, we did most of the work in-house. But when I had to buy my first co-founder out, I realized that I wanted experts. So I was looking for a law firm that understood my business, being a small technology business, emerging business in Boston, and realized that Gesmer was the place to be. And what I really appreciated, especially as an attorney, is that I was dealing with expert attorneys. I wasn't dealing with any junior attorneys.
Right.
So whenever I had a question, most likely the person I was talking to on the Gesmer side had had that situation 1, 2, 5, or 10 times.
Right.
So it could give me information on it very, very quickly. And when I tried to participate, having a legal background and a business background, it was always very collaborative. So we'd come up with many different solutions. It could be 2 or 3. And in so many instances, the folks at Gesmer would say, that's a good thing here, but Mark, you probably haven't heard of this. This happened in another instance. Sure. Oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't do it this way. Or we've done this 15 times. So when I ended up doing my last deal a year ago, we were up against some big New York City firms. And it was interesting because the team at Gesmer had seen everything before. Sure. They knew what to expect. And in the end, after I was acquired, I asked the acquiring company what their bill was, and it was 3x what my bill was. So I got everything I needed, and I paid a third of the cost of a huge firm.
I was amazed and impressed at the level of relationship, and not being a lawyer, the willingness of the team to work with me to let me do as much as I could.
Sure.
But then to develop the relationship, so I've always felt like my company is known.
Sure.
And so when we've moved from a particularly squirrely lease negotiation to an HR issue to other matters, the team engages first with the company and getting who we are as a company, and then bringing their legal advice to bear in a way that makes sense for what we're looking for out of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, we totally believe that the business drives the legal. It's not the other way around, quite frankly. So I'm glad we're able to do that.
It's been fantastic.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So I want to wrap this up, but I want to get kind of words of wisdom, if you will, parting words from each one of you for those entrepreneurs and founders or prospective founders that are out there that are looking for that piece of advice or that kernel of knowledge you can provide. So I'll start with you, Mark.
Okay, well, I would just say keep at it. I mean, the biggest thing as an entrepreneur is to keep at it, because you'll run into so many obstacles that will tell you it's not worth it, it's not going to make it. And I think persistence is king. If you have a great idea and you believe in it strongly, keep going at it, and at some point I think you'll be successful.
That's good advice. Sarah?
I recently heard that the grass is greener where you water it. So,
like that one.
Don't worry about somebody else's business. Don't worry about what you wish your business looked like or where you wish it were. Deal with what's in front of you and go get it.
Right. Make it your own, right?
Yeah.
Right, great. Chad?
Well, the other piece of advice I often give, and is particularly relevant from a legal perspective, is don't be afraid to have those hard conversations about roles and responsibilities and contributions with your co-founders. I avoided that in the beginning, and when 3 of them decided to leave, it was not the easiest thing in the world to work through. If we had just had some honest conversations and put some stuff to paper to begin with, it would have probably gone a lot better for us. So I think don't be afraid to do that.
Well, listen, I want to thank my 3 guests. You guys, your time is very valuable. We're very appreciative that you're sitting here with us. I know our viewers are appreciative of it as well. So thank you very sincerely for being here with us. And thank you, viewers, for joining us at the Gesmer Updegrove Founder Entrepreneurial Discussion. See you next time. So thank you for watching. Please feel free to follow us on social media. You can like, comment, or subscribe. And please go to our website, gesmer.com.